My friends, good morning. Have you ever had this experience in your life? That to the question, what's next, the only answer you could come up with is, I don't know. I just don't know. I think most of us, if not all, at one point or another, had that experience. And you just kind of had to wait. Now, I mention this because right after the resurrection, the most important question for the disciples of Jesus was, guess what? What's next? And I would suggest that Pentecost is the answer to that question. It was an incredible event. And the person who wrote the Acts of the Apostles and described that event must have heard about that day as the story about that day of Pentecost was passed on from one generation of the disciples to the next. And so he decides to write it down and tell us the story. Now clearly, something amazing happened on that day and something difficult to explain. We read in the Acts of the Apostles, when the time for Pentecost was fulfilled, they were all in one place together. And suddenly, there came from the sky a noise like a strong driving wind. And it filled the entire house in which they were. And then there appeared to them tongues as of fire. Now, there is a noise like a strong wind. It's not clear what that noise was, but it was powerful. It was kind of difficult to describe it. So, the only thing that the author of the story can tell us is it was kind of like a strong wind. And then there appeared tongues as of fire. And again, it was not fire per se. It was kind of looking like fire. And again, it's not easy to describe exactly what it was. You know, today you could compare it maybe to the fireworks on the 4th of July. But basically the point is this: it was just amazing. You know, and I find it difficult to even tell you how amazing it was and to explain it to you. And then it gets even better. The apostles are speaking in a language that everyone can understand. People are amazed, astounded, and puzzled. We read, they were confused because each one heard them speaking in his own language. They were astounded. And in amazement, they asked, Are not all these people who are speaking Galileans? Then how does each of us hear them in his native language? We are Parthians and Medes, inhabitants of Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, Asia, Egypt, Libya, and Rome, and so on, and so on. The point is, the whole thing was incredible and almost impossible to explain. Not unlike the times that we have, those moments that you just can't describe it adequately. You know what happened, but you just don't have words to capture the experience. And you do your best to try to describe it, and you say it was kind of like this, or it felt like that. The fact that it was a confusing experience proves that it was a miraculous experience, difficult to understand. So the author of the Acts just tries his best to tell us the story. However, the details of the story are not as important as what the story is meant to tell us. As strange as the story is, what are we to make of it? And I think the meaning of the story in and of itself is very clear. The story of Pentecost, the speaking in tongues, reminds us that the message of the gospel now is meant to be preached to all people, no matter what language, race, ethnicity, or nationality. The gospel is for everyone. Now, in the Gospel of John that we heard today, we have another strange event happening. Jesus comes into the room even though the doors are closed. How did he enter? John does not explain it because it cannot be explained. He can only tell us that is what happened. And Jesus shows them his wounds and he breathes on them. And we read, he said, "As the Father has sent me, so I send you." And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. Whose sins you forgive are forgiven them, and whose sins you retain are retained." It is another Pentecost-like experience. Right after the resurrection, as the disciples are sent, they are not sent alone. Jesus gives them the gift, and the gift is the Holy Spirit. And that is what Jesus promised them at the Last Supper just 4 days earlier. He said to them as they were sitting at the table, "The Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I have said to you." Now, Pope Francis, in one of his reflections on Pentecost a few years ago, compared the Feast of Pentecost to the disciples sitting in the school of the Holy Spirit. And I just love the image of sitting in the school of the Holy Spirit. And when you sit, you pause, you open yourself to learning and to guidance. And the Holy Spirit is the teacher who is there to teach you everything you will need to know. But the trick is, you have to sit down, stop, and just pause. And the teaching is not academic or just intellectual knowledge. We are not called to be encyclopedias or dictionaries of faith. The teaching is more about quality and not the quantity. It's about perspective and attitude, perception. The Spirit makes us see everything in a new way, in a different way, with the eyes of Jesus. The Holy Spirit teaches us to put God before our own selves, the way Jesus put God before himself. Pope Francis says the Holy Spirit basically teaches us three things, especially as you face that question, what's next? And the only answer you have is like, I don't know. When you sit down, the Holy Spirit teaches us three things. Number one, where to begin. Number two, what path to take. And number three, how to walk. See, in particular at the moment when you are not sure where to begin, which way to go, and how you could ever make it. As we sit and listen to the voice of the Holy Spirit, in that school of the Holy Spirit. And by the way, it's tuition free. Tuition free. You just got to sit down, open your heart. As you sit in that school of the Holy Spirit will teach you always these three things. Where to begin, what path to take, and how to walk.